Hello there, friends. My name is Belle, and this is episode 2 of Fairy Tales in Exile. In case you didn't see the first episode, this is a small series I'm doing where I read through a book of fairy tales that I have never read before and share them with all of you who have probably never read them either, unless you're even more of a nerd about fairy tales than I am. In which case, congratulations! The book I decided to start with is Andrew Lang's The Lilac Fairy Book, and the story we will be reading today is number 2 in the book, and is titled The False Prince and the True. Without any further ado, here's the story. The king had just awakened from his midday sleep, for it was summer, and everyone rose early and rested from 12 to 3, as they do in hot countries. A siesta, very nice. He had dressed himself in cool white clothes, and was passing through the hall on his way to the council chamber, when a number of young nobles suddenly appeared before him, and one amongst them stepped forward and spoke. "Sire, this morning we were all playing tennis in the court, the prince and this gentleman with the rest, when there broke out some dispute about the game. The prince lost his temper and said many insulting things to the other who was playing against him, till at length the gentleman whom you see there struck him violently in the face, so that the blood ran from his mouth and nose. We were all so horrified at the sight that we should most likely have killed the man then and there for daring to lay hands on the prince, had not his grandfather the Duke stepped between and commanded us to lay the affair before you." So, there was a bit of a tussle on the tennis court in this royal kingdom that sounds suspiciously like Spain. The king had listened attentively to the story, and when it was ended, he said, "I suppose the prince had no arms with him, or else he would have used them?" "Yes, sire, he had arms. He always carries a dagger in his belt. But when he saw the blood pouring from his face, he went to a corner of the court and began to cry, which was the strangest thing of all. So this prince is a bit of a wuss." On hearing this, the king walked to the window and stood for a few minutes with his back to the room, where the company of young men remained silent. Then he came back, his face white and stern. "I tell you," he said, "and it is the solemn truth, that I would rather you had told me that the prince was dead, though he is my only son, than know that he would suffer such an injury without attempting to avenge it. As for the gentleman who struck him, he will be brought before my judges and will plead his own cause, but I hardly think he can escape death after having assaulted the heir to the crown." The young man raised his head as if to reply, but the king would not listen and commanded his guards to put him under arrest, adding, however, that if the prisoner wished to visit any part of the city, he was at liberty to do so, properly guarded, and in 15 days he would be brought to trial before the highest judges in the land. Something tells me that this liberty the poor, violent tennis-playing guest has been given is going to end up giving him an opportunity to find some tricky way out of this situation. I don't know if this guy is the false prince or the true prince. I feel like now that we have a prince and an interloper, we're going to have the false prince, the true in there somewhere, but who knows? The young man left the king's presence, surrounded by soldiers and accompanied by many of his friends, for he was a great favorite. By their advice, he spent the 14 days that remained to him going about to seek counsel from wise men of all sorts, as to how he might escape death, but no one could help him, for none could find any excuse for the blow he had given the prince. "Sorry, dude, I'm not going to be your lawyer. You beat up royalty. There's nothing you can do here. Make better decisions next time." The 14th night had come, and in despair the prisoner went out to take his last walk through the city. He wandered on, hardly knowing where he went, and his face was so white and desperate that none of his companions dared speak to him. The sad little procession had passed some hours in this manner, when, near the gate of a monastery, an old woman appeared round a corner, and suddenly stood before the young man. She was bent almost double, and was so wizened and wrinkled that she looked at least 90. Only her eyes were bright and quick as those of a girl. "Sir," she said, "I know all that has happened to you, and how you are seeking, if in any wise you can save your life." In any wise? I'm not making that up. That seems like a typo. If any ways you can save your life? "But there is none that can answer that question, save only I myself, if you will promise to do all I ask." At her words, the prisoner felt as if a load had all at once been rolled off him. "Oh, save me, and I will do anything," he cried. "It is so hard to leave the world and go out into the darkness." "You will not need to do that," answered the old woman. "You have only got to marry me, and you will soon be free." She's out here trying to get a man. She knows that she's gotta find someone who's truly desperate. Something tells me that she's secretly an enchanted princess. Maybe this is some like Howl's Moving Castle type gag where she's actually a 19-year-old, but she's been cursed to be 90. We'll see. Marry you, exclaimed he. But, I am not yet 20, and why? You must be 100 at least. Oh, no, it is quite impossible. He spoke without thinking, but the flash of anger which darted from her eyes made him feel uncomfortable. However, all she said was, "As you like. Since you reject me, let the crows have you," and hurried away down the street. Something tells me we have not seen the last of this old woman. I'm thinking either fairy or shapeshifter or enchanted old sorceress. Either way, I can't wait to see what happens next. Left to himself, the full horror of his coming death rushed upon the young man, and he understood that he had just thrown away his sole chance of life. Well, if he must, he said to himself, and began to run as fast as he could after the old crone, who by this time could scarcely be seen even in the moonlight. Who would have believed a woman past 90 could walk with such speed? It seemed more like flying. But at length, breathless and exhausted, he reached her side and gasped out, "Madam, pardon me for my hasty words just now. I was wrong and will thankfully accept the offer you made me." "Ah, I thought you would come to your senses," answered she in rather an odd voice. "We have no time to lose. Follow me at once." And they went on silently and swiftly till they stopped at the door of a small house in which the priest lived. Before him, the old woman bade the prisoner swear that she should be his wife, and this he did in the presence of a witness. Then, begging the priest and the guards to leave them alone for a little, she told the young man what he was to do, and the next morning he was brought before the king and the judges. She could very easily be scheming to get his money. I'm assuming this guy is rich. You marry a rich man right before he's about to be executed. You give him some advice that's supposed to help him survive, but actually just gets him killed off faster. He has to, promise before the court that all of my money is going to go to this little old woman, and boom, you've got it made. You've got a bunch of money, you can leave it to your grandkids whenever you die, which, considering she's 90, is probably going to be soon. It's probably not what's going to happen, but that's what I feel like would make a really good plot twist. The hall was full to overflowing when the prisoner entered it, and all marveled at the brightness of his face. The king inquired if he had any excuse to plead for the high treason he had committed by striking the heir to the throne, and, if so, to be quick in setting it forth. With a low bow, the youth made answer in a clear voice, "O my lord and gracious king, and you, nobles and wise men of the land, I leave my cause without fear in your hands, knowing that you will listen and judge rightly, and that you will suffer me to speak to the end, before you give judgment. For 4 years, you, O king, had been married to the queen, and yet had no children, which grieved you greatly. The queen saw this, and likewise that your love was going from her, and thought night and day of some plan that might put an end to this evil. At length, when you were away fighting in distant countries, she decided what she would do, and adopted in secret the baby of a poor quarryman, sending a messenger to tell you that you had a son. No one suspected the truth except a priest, to whom the queen confessed the truth, and in a few weeks she fell ill and died, leaving you, the baby, to be brought up as became a prince. And now, if your highness will permit me, I will speak of myself." "What you have already told me," answered the king, "is so strange that I cannot imagine what more there is to tell, but go on with your story." "One day, shortly after the death of the queen," continued the young man, "your highness was hunting and outstripped all your attendants while chasing the deer. You were in a part of the country which you did not know, so seeing an orchard all pink and white with apple blossoms, and a girl tossing a ball in one corner, you went up to her to ask her your way. But when she turned to answer you, you were so struck with her beauty that all else fled from your mind. Again and again you rode back to see her, and at length persuaded her to marry you. She only thought you a poor knight, and agreed that, as you wished it, the marriage should be kept secret. After the ceremony, you gave her 3 rings and a charm with a cross on it, and then put her in a cottage in the forest, thinking to hide the matter securely." This king sounds like kind of a douche. He isn't married anymore. His queen is dead. There's no reason why he couldn't elevate this little country girl to be a queen, except clearly, no, she's too poor. We can't have these common folk who run around in apple orchards sullying the throne. I digress. For some months, you visited the cottage every week, but a rebellion broke out in a distant part of the kingdom and called for your presence. When next you rode up to the cottage, it was empty, and none could inform you whither your bride had gone. That, sire, I can now tell you." And the young man paused and looked at the king, who colored deeply. "She went back to her father, the old duke, once your chamberlain, and the cross on her breast revealed at once who you were. Fierce was his anger when he heard his daughter's tale, and he vowed that he would hide her safely from you, till a day came when you would claim her publicly as your queen. By and by, I was born, and was brought up by my grandfather in one of his great houses. Here are the rings you gave to my mother, and here is the cross, and these'll prove if I am your son or not." As he spoke, the young man laid the jewels at the feet of the king, and the nobles and the judges pressed round to examine them. The king alone did not move from his seat, for he had forgotten the Hall of Justice and all about him, and saw only the apple orchard, as it was 20 years ago, and the beautiful girl playing at ball. A sudden silence round him made him look up, and he found the eyes of the assembly fixed on him. "It is true. It is he who is my son, and not the other," he said with an effort, "and let every man present swear to acknowledge him as king after my death." Therefore, one by one, they all knelt before him and took the oath, and a message was sent to the false prince, forbidding him ever again to appear at court, though a handsome pension was granted to him. At last, the ceremony was over, and the king, signing to his newly found son to follow him, rose and went into another room. "Tell me how you knew all that," he said, throwing himself into a carved chair filled with crimson cushions, and the prince told of his meeting with the old woman who had brought him the jewels from his mother, and how he had sworn before a priest to marry her, though he did not want to do it, on account of the difference in their ages, and besides, he would rather receive a bride chosen by the king himself. But the king frowned and answered sharply, "You swore to marry her if she saved your life, and come what may, you must fulfill your promise." Then, striking a silver shield that hung close by, he said to the equerry who appeared immediately, "Go, and seek the priest who lives near the door of the prison, and ask him where you can find the old woman who visited him last night, and when you have found her, bring her to the palace." Why doesn't the prince know where his own wife is? Did they just get married and then say, "Okay, we're gonna go our separate ways, I'm officially married to you, I get your income," or something? I don't understand what's in it for her. It took some time to discover the whereabouts of the old woman, but at length it was accomplished, and when she arrived at the palace of the equerry, she was received with royal honors, as became the bride of the prince. The guards looked at each other with astonished eyes as the wizened creature, bowed with age, passed between their lines, but they were more amazed still at the lightness of her step as she skipped up the steps to the great door before which the king was standing, with the prince at his side. If they both felt a shock at the appearance of the aged lady, they did not show it, and the king, with a grave bow, took her hand and led her to the chapel, where a bishop was waiting to perform the marriage ceremony. I guess since he's the prince, they now have to get officially married, because it's going to be fancier? More official? I don't understand this. For the next few weeks, little was seen of the prince, who spent all his days hunting and trying to forget the old wife at home. I mean, that's fair. There's like a 70-year age difference there. I can't blame him. As for the princess, I guess she's technically a princess. No one troubled himself about her, and she passed the days alone in her apartments, for she had absolutely declined the services of the ladies-in-waiting whom the king had appointed for her. She knows how to self-isolate. I like her. One night, the prince returned after a longer chase than usual, and he was so tired that he went up straight to bed. Suddenly, he was awakened by a strange noise in the room, and suspecting that a robber might have stolen in, he jumped out of bed and seized his sword, which lay ready to his hand. Then, he perceived that the noise proceeded from the next room, which belonged to the princess, and was lighted by a burning torch. Creeping softly to the door, he peeped through it, and beheld her lying quietly with a crown of gold and pearls upon her head, her wrinkles all gone, and her face, which was whiter than the snow, as fresh as that of a girl of 14. Okay, so he's not yet 20, so this isn't quite as creepy, but... Could that really be his wife? That beautiful, beautiful creature? I called it. I'm not thrilled with the fact that she's supposed to be 14, but I guess that's better than 90? The prince was still gazing in surprise when the lady opened her eyes and smiled at him. "Yes, I really am your wife," she said, as if she had guessed his thoughts, and the enchantment is ended. Why? Now I must tell you who I am, and what befell to cause me to take the shape of an old woman. The King of Granada is my father, and I was born in the palace which overlooks the plain of Vega. I was only a few months old when a wicked fairy, who had a spite against my parents, cast a spell over me, bending my back and withering my skin till I looked as if I was 100 years old, and making me such an object of disgust to everyone that at length the king ordered my nurse to take me away from the palace. She was the only person who cared about me, and we lived together in this city on a small pension allowed me by the king. I really want to know what that looked like, this month-old child that's also an old woman. Did she have the brain of like a 3-month-old while she was in the body of a 90-year-old? I have questions. Also, this is ageism. When I was about 3, an old man arrived at our house and begged my nurse to let him come in and rest, as he could walk no longer. She saw that he was very ill, so put him to bed and took such care of him that by and by he was as strong as ever. In gratitude for her goodness to him, he told her that he was a wizard and could give her anything she chose to ask for except life or death. So she answered that what she longed for most in the world was that my wrinkled skin should disappear and that I should regain the beauty with which I was born. To this he replied that as my misfortune resulted from a spell, this was rather difficult, but he would do his best, and at any rate he could promise that before my 15th birthday I should be freed from the enchantment if I could get a man who would swear to marry me as I was. This is like a reverse Beauty and the Beast, except the beastly aspect is just that she's old. As you may suppose, this was not easy, as my ugliness was such that no one would look at me a second time. My nurse and I were almost in despair, as my 15th birthday was drawing near, and I had never so much as spoken to a man. Well, you know what? You're not supposed to be out looking for a husband at the age of like 12 or 13 or 14 anyway. I know this was written in 1910 and probably based off a story that was collected much earlier when it was normal to marry off at least the children of aristocracy at younger ages to secure marriage alliances, but even middle-class peasant people didn't get married at age 15. They got married when they were like 20 and could actually gather up the money to support a new household by themselves. I know this is a fairy tale, and it has no actual historical context, and has probably been heavily edited to suit Edwardian social ideas of what a fairy tale should be, but I'm still not happy with it. At last, we received a visit from the wizard, who told us what had happened at court and your story, bidding me to put myself in your way when you had lost all hope and offer to save you if you would consent to marry me. That is my history, and now you must beg the king to send messengers at once to Granada to inform my father of our marriage, and I think, she added with a smile, that he will not refuse us his blessing. The end. First impressions? This guy, the hero, did still very much assault someone else against whom he was playing tennis, and had absolutely no real consequences because he turned out to be royal. I feel really bad for the false prince. Yes, he gets a pension, but this poor lad finds out that not only is his parentage not what he thought it was, but that he has to leave home because he's just not suitable to take the throne, despite the fact that he had probably been trained in all kinds of civics and government and languages and politics and strategy and all the things that you would need to know to run a government. But nope, it's all about those genetics, so they take this random guy who attacks his tennis partners, and just because he has the proper blood, he gets to be king. Second of all, I'm still not thrilled that this little old woman turned out to be literally 14. 14! I have questions, Andrew Lang. Give me answers. So, I hope you enjoyed the tale of the false prince and the true as much as I did, or at least got a kick out of tearing it apart with me, because I personally didn't end up liking it all that much. So I hope you will join me next time when we read The Yogi's Punishment. I think it's Yogi. It's spelled J-O-G-I, so it could be Jogi, but I'm going to say Yogi. Until next time, I hope you are all safe and healthy and staying properly isolated until the Great Plague is over and done with and we can once again go out into the wide world and have fun. Bye!